The cold hit me first. 3 months in Winnipeg had softened me to the particular bite of Thompson's winter. It was 28 below when I stepped off the employee shuttle, the kind of cold that freezes the hairs in your nostrils mid-breath. I crunched across the railway yard, boots breaking through the top crust of yesterday's snowfall. The medical release form sat folded in my breast pocket, signed by Dr. Abernathy with his neat block letters. Cleared for full duty. 3 months of mandatory leave, weekly therapy sessions, and little blue pills had apparently fixed whatever broke in me during last October's northern run. The yard hadn't changed. 5 locomotives stood in their usual places, exhaust vapor rising in white columns against the slate-gray morning sky. The main office trailer's lights were on, windows fogged from the heat difference. 2 mechanics worked silently on a switch engine, their breath clouding around their faces as they passed tools back and forth. I'd arrived 90 minutes early. The anxiety meds were supposed to help with the punctuality obsession, but old habits die hard. At least I'd slept 4 hours last night. A victory by my standards. Richardson. I turned to find Louis Parker watching me from beside engine 487. He'd been with Canadian National 20-some years, all of it on the northern routes. His face was tanned leather stretched over sharp angles, eyes set deep beneath a thermal watch cap pulled low. "Welcome back to the ass end of nowhere," he said, no warmth in the greeting. "Good to be back." The lie came automatically. Louis studied me, looking for cracks. "Medical sign-off on you?" I patted my pocket. "All official. I'm good to go." "You're on the Gillam run. Leaves at 2:15. He didn't move, still assessing me with those deep-set eyes. "You replacing Martinez." The name hung between us. Greg had been my partner before the incident. Before the 3 a.m. panic attack that left me hyperventilating in the crew car while Greg radioed for emergency protocols. "I heard he transferred south," I said. Louis's expression tightened. "That what they told you?" The wind picked up, driving tiny ice crystals against my cheek. I adjusted my scarf, buying time. "Personnel just said I'd be taking his route. Something wrong?" He glanced around the yard, then jerked his head toward the locomotive. Inside. The cab of engine 487 was 20 degrees warmer than outside. I settled into the conductor's seat while Louis closed the door with a metallic thunk. He remained standing, pulling a folded paper from his jacket. "Greg's gone," he said flatly. "Disappeared 6 weeks back during a routine Gillam run." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" Security footage shows him walking into the tree line behind the north yard. Louis stared out the windshield at the dark wall of pines beyond the tracks. "Never came out. That doesn't make any sense. Greg wouldn't..." Found his quarters untouched, coffee still warm, phone on the nightstand, wallet with $312 cash. Louis turned back to me. "Search and rescue did 4 sweeps. Nothing." I'd known Greg 5 years. Methodical, careful Greg who triple-checked switches and carried 2 backup flashlights. The kind of guy who measured coffee grounds with a kitchen scale. And no one saying anything? No investigation? Louis unfolded the paper in his hands. It was yellowed at the edges, the creases worn thin from repeated folding. Company line is he walked off the job. Happens up here sometimes, they say. Isolation gets to people. He placed the paper on the control panel in front of me. "Read this." The sheet contained a handwritten list in faded blue ink. 1. Count passengers against manifest at every stop. 2. Never open doors for anyone not on the manifest. 3. If train stops more than 15 minutes, leave. 4. Never stop during snowstorms. 5. If passenger speaks in riddles or mentions impossible places, maintain conversation but don't engage physically. 6. Anyone claiming Churchill destination is lying. Churchill line was abandoned. 7. The rider can only board stationary trains. 8. Radio must remain on Channel 7 at all times, even if only static. I looked up. "What is this?" "Rules," Louis said. for the northern routes. These aren't in any manual. No, they're not. He tapped the paper with a thick finger. But every conductor who's lasted up here knows them. I read through the list again. Is this some kind of joke? Hazing the guy back from medical leave? Greg had a copy, kept it folded in his breast pocket. Louis's voice was flat. Found it torn to pieces in his quarters. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature settled in my stomach. I studied Louis's face for any sign he was pulling my leg. What's the rider? Louis sank into the engineer's seat, knees cracking. You'll know it when you see it. Pray you don't. This is crazy, I said, but I found myself carefully folding the paper anyway. Greg was solid. The most level-headed guy I knew. That's why they paired you two. Louis rubbed his gloved hands together. You were the nervous one. He was the rock. Balance. The northern Manitoba wilderness stretched beyond the window, endless white, broken by the dark vertical lines of spruce and pine. Somewhere out there, Greg had walked into the trees and vanished. What happens if you break these rules? I asked, slipping the paper into my pocket next to the medical release. Ask Greg. Louis stood up, joints popping. If you find him. He pulled open the cab door, letting in a blast of cold air. Before stepping out, he turned back. Keep your radio on channel 7. If you hear anything that's not me or dispatch, don't answer. Just switch to channel 3 and call for emergency stop. That's not protocol. No, he agreed. It's not. I sat alone in the cab after he left, reading through the rules again. Outside, the yard continued its morning routine. Mechanics checking brake lines, yardmaster directing a switching operation, 2 clerks huddled together sharing a cigarette near the office door. Normal, except for the list in my hand and the knowledge that Greg was gone. At 1:45, I collected my manifest from the dispatch office. Sandra Hughes, the afternoon supervisor, handed me the clipboard without meeting my eyes. 12 passengers to Gillam, scheduled arrival 1840. She finally looked up. Good to have you back, Richardson. Thanks, I said, scanning the names. Anything I should know about the run? Her face remained professionally blank. Weather report shows clear skies until tomorrow morning. I nodded, recognizing the non-answer for what it was. Back at the locomotive, Louis was checking the external connections one last time. He straightened when he saw me approach. Remember what I told you, he said quietly. Count the manifest at every stop. Keep channel 7 open. I still don't understand. You don't need to understand, you just need to follow the rules. He glanced at his watch. I've got the evening Thompson-Gillam run. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, radio me. The sun hung low in the southern sky, casting long blue shadows across the snow. In 2 hours, it would be dark. I climbed into the conductor's compartment, reviewed the pre-departure checklist, and radioed the engineer that we were ready to board passengers. As they filed onto the train, mainly workers heading to the mining operations near Gillam, I counted each one against the manifest, feeling slightly foolish but unwilling to ignore Louis's warnings. At exactly 2:15, we pulled away from Thompson Station. I stood at the rear door of the last car, watching the yard recede into the distance, until all that remained visible was the faint glow of lights against the darkening horizon. Then there was only the wilderness, the rhythmic clacking of wheels against rails, and the strange rules folded in my pocket. 3 hours into my shift, I'd settled into the familiar routine. The manifest listed 12 passengers total, mostly mining crew headed to Gillam for the weekly rotation. I'd counted 12 bodies boarding, confirmed 12 occupied seats, and logged the count in my conductor's notebook along with the departure time, 14:15. The sun hung low to the southwest, barely clearing the tree line. This far north in January, we'd lose it completely in another hour. I moved through the first car with practiced efficiency. 4 passengers, 2 minors playing cards across a shared tray table, a woman with red-framed reading glasses reviewing technical diagrams, and an elderly man who'd already fallen asleep against the window, breath fogging the glass in rhythmic patterns. Tickets checked, manifest marked. I slid open the connecting door and stepped into the second car. The temperature dropped 5 degrees between cars. I made a note to check the heating system later and adjusted my company-issued fleece before scanning the second compartment. 8 passengers should have been here according to my count. I saw 7. The manifest clipboard felt suddenly heavier in my hand. I double-checked my count, walking slowly down the aisle. 2 mining company administrators in matching parkas, a heavy-set man with a thermos, 3 young workers huddled around a phone watching something with shared earbuds, a woman knitting what looked like a child's hat. 7. I turned to check the bathroom at the rear when I noticed him. Seat 14B hadn't been empty after all. A man sat there, face angled toward the window. I hadn't registered him on my first count, an impossibility given my methodical sweep of the car. He wore a dark winter coat with the collar turned up, no company logos or standard issue markers. His hands rested on his knees, pale and perfectly still. I approached, manifest held forward like a shield. "Ticket check, sir." He turned. His face had an unusual quality. Skin so pale it seemed to reflect the cabin's fluorescent lighting rather than absorb it. His eyes caught the light too, bright in a way that made me think of animal eyes in headlights. "Of course," he said with a smile that revealed too many teeth. His voice carried a strange resonance like words spoken in an empty metal tank. "Your destination?" I asked, pen hovering over the manifest. "Churchill," he replied easily. "Visiting my sister." My pen stopped. The Churchill line had been abandoned 3 years back after the flooding. We hadn't run passenger service there since, not on any train, not on any schedule. Rule 6 pulsed in my memory. Anyone claiming Churchill destination is lying. I kept my voice level. "Name, please?" "Thomas." His smile widened slightly. "I've been riding trains since before the snow learned to fall." The nonsensical statement clanged through my head like a warning bell. Rule 5. If passenger speaks in riddles or mentions impossible places, maintain conversation but don't engage physically. "That's quite a while," I said, forcing my hand to remain steady as I pretended to check the manifest. "Not finding you on my list, Thomas." He tilted his head at an angle that looked uncomfortable for human neck muscles. "Lists are imperfect. Always something missing." Outside, the window glass shuddered as wind pressed against it. I glanced out to see darkening clouds gathering above the trees. The weather report had predicted clear skies until morning. "Where did you board, Thomas?" "Where all journeys begin," he said, "at the place where waiting ends." I maintained my position in the aisle, keeping the regulation 30 inches between us. The clipboard made a small creaking sound as my grip tightened. "Your sister in Churchill," I said, following Rule 5's instruction to maintain conversation. "What does she do there?" "She listens to the ice." Thomas's bright eyes never blinked. "She counts the breaths between creaks. Did you know there are trains that run underground through ice caves? Magnificent machines. The passengers pay their fare with memories of summer." The heating vent above us cycled on with a metallic rattle. Thomas looked up at it and smiled, as if recognizing an old friend. Snow began speckling the windows, small white flakes that dissolved immediately on contact with the warm glass. Within 30 seconds, the flakes grew larger, more numerous. The train swayed slightly as wind gusted against its side. "Excuse me," I said, stepping backward toward the intercom. "I need to check with the engineer." Thomas nodded. "Weather changing, like moods, like minds. Snow falls differently when it knows it's being watched." I keyed the intercom, keeping my eyes on Thomas. "Richardson to Engineer Davis." The speaker crackled. "Go ahead, Richardson. Weather update requested. Seeing snow development not on the forecast." A pause. "Just got the alert. Unexpected system moving in from the northwest. Visibility still good, but they're saying it could deteriorate quickly." Rule 4 thrummed in my mind. Never stop during snowstorms. "Understood. Keep me posted on any changes." I replaced the handset and made a decision. "I'll be right back, Thomas." In the vestibule between cars, I pulled the folded rules from my pocket and smoothed the paper against the wall. The fourth and sixth items seemed to pulse on the page. I had an unmanifested passenger claiming an impossible destination and a snowstorm developing outside. I keyed my radio, switching to channel 7 as instructed. "Richardson to Parker, over." Static answered me. "Richardson to Parker. Louis, you copy?" Nothing but white noise, the sound of empty airwaves stretching across the wilderness. Louis had said he'd be on the evening Thompson-Gillum run. He should have been on radio. I turned the volume down and slipped the radio back into its holster. Through the small window in the connecting door, I could see Thomas still seated, now humming something to himself, fingers tapping rhythmically on his knees. The snow outside fell faster, heavier. The light was fading as the storm clouds thickened overhead, turning afternoon into premature evening. The track ahead disappeared into swirling white. I needed to count passengers again, verify everyone against the manifest one more time, follow the rules. When I re-entered the car, Thomas looked up and smiled. "Tell me about yourself, Conductor," he said. "How do you pass the time when the wheels stop turning?" The question sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the failing heater. "The wheels don't stop," I replied automatically. "We maintain schedule." Thomas's smile widened. "Except during snowstorms," he said softly. The intercom crackled to life. Engineer Davis's voice sounded tighter than before. "Richardson, visibility dropping below safety thresholds, reducing speed to compensate." I moved to the intercom, keeping my back against the wall, Thomas still in my peripheral vision. "Copy that. Maintain safe speed. Can we continue?" A pause filled with static. "For now, we'll advise if conditions worsen." I glanced out the window. The snow was falling so heavily now that the nearest trees were barely visible, just dark smudges in a world of white. The train had already slowed considerably. I could feel the difference in the floor beneath my feet. When I looked back, Thomas was watching me with those two bright eyes, his smile knowing. "The snow wasn't in your plans," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Weather changes," I replied, moving away from the intercom, keeping my distance from him. "That's why we have protocols." Protocols. He savored the word like it amused him. Rules written by those who survived to write them down. The train lurched slightly, adjusting to a lower speed. The snow outside the windows now fell sideways, driven by wind that moaned around the car's frame. I needed to check the other cars, count everyone again, make sure all my actual manifested passengers were safe. But I couldn't leave Thomas unobserved. "Engineering degree?" Thomas asked suddenly. "Pardon?" "Your training. You have the look of someone who understands machines, the way they slot together, the way they break." I hadn't mentioned my background to anyone at the railway. My engineering degree was 8 years behind me, abandoned after 2 years, working for a firm that built industrial cooling systems. "I should check on the other passengers," I said, not answering his question. Thomas nodded agreeably. The counted and the accounted for, very responsible. His eyes held mine for a moment too long. "I'll be here when you return." It sounded like a promise. I backed toward the connecting door, unwilling to turn my back on him. The wind howled louder outside, and the train noticeably slowed again. As I stepped through to the first car, the intercom crackled once more. "Richardson," Engineer Davis said, his voice tight with professional concern. "Visibility 00. Emergency protocols initiating." My stomach dropped as I realized what that meant. The train was about to stop. The train jerked, then lurched, then stopped. I braced against the wall separating the passenger cars, feeling the familiar sensation of wheels locked against rails. The vibration beneath my feet died completely. Outside, only white existed, snow so thick it erased the world beyond our windows. Engineer Davis's voice crackled through my radio. Complete stop initiated. Visibility 00, cannot proceed safely. My throat tightened. 2 rules broken in the span of 5 seconds. Stopping during a snowstorm and becoming stationary for what might exceed 15 minutes. I checked my watch. 16:47. The countdown had begun. Copy that, I said into the radio, maintaining position in second car. The first car's passengers had shown no reaction to our predicament beyond mild irritation. The elderly man continued sleeping. The card players reshuffled their deck. The woman with red frames adjusted her reading light. I slid the connecting door open and stepped back into the second car. The heating system had failed completely now, leaving the temperature hovering just above freezing. My breath clouded in front of my face. Thomas remained in seat 14B, but something about him had changed. His posture seemed looser, his limbs arranged at slightly wrong angles. The smile that had been merely unsettling before now stretched his face unnaturally wide. "Weather worse than predicted," he said, voice carrying that metallic resonance. "Inconvenient for schedules, convenient for other things." I positioned myself halfway down the aisle, maintaining maximum distance while keeping him in view. The manifest clipboard felt ridiculous in my hand now, but I held onto it like a talisman. "We'll be moving again soon," I said, noting that the other 7 passengers were watching me, sensing my tension. Thomas tilted his head at that impossible angle again. "You believe that because you need to." His fingers began tapping against his knee, producing a sound too loud for flesh against fabric. "Time is important now. Very important." I checked my watch again. 16:51. 4 minutes stopped. The wind screamed around the train car, a high whistling through microscopic gaps in the window seals. But beneath it I heard something else. A rhythmic thudding moved along the roof of the car. Methodical, deliberate impacts that couldn't be explained by ice or snow. Thomas stopped tapping. His bright eyes flicked upward, and his smile grew impossibly wider. "My friend is punctual," he said. "Always arrives exactly when expected." The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. Several passengers looked up nervously. The woman with the knitting needles made a small, involuntary sound. "Is there a problem with the train?" she asked, her needles motionless in her lap. Before I could answer, Thomas spoke. "Not with the train." He turned those reflecting eyes toward her. "With the spaces between stops." She stared at him, confusion evident in her furrowed brow. I moved into the conversational gap. "Standard procedure during whiteout conditions," I explained, keeping my voice level. "We'll be underway shortly." The thudding above us grew louder, distinct footsteps tracking from the front of the car toward the rear, heavy metallic impacts that resonated through the ceiling panels. 16:57, 10 minutes stationary. I unclipped my radio and switched to channel 7, holding it close to my mouth to minimize the volume. "Richardson to Parker. Louis, we have an emergency situation, stopped in blizzard conditions." Static answered, then a voice, but not Louis's. A grinding, scraping sound that might have been words stretched and distorted beyond recognition. It built in volume until it became a mechanical shriek that caused feedback through the speaker. I killed the volume and reclipped the radio, aware that every passenger was staring at me now. Thomas stood up. His movement was wrong, fluid but angular, as if his joints had additional points of articulation. He rose to his full height, and I realized he was much taller than he had appeared while seated. 12 minutes, he said, not looking at his watch or any timepiece. "Rules say 15, but sometimes exceptions occur." The mining administrators in the front row were whispering to each other now. glancing between Thomas and me. The three workers with shared earbuds had removed them, sensing the shift in the car's atmosphere. Thomas moved toward the rear exit with that same unsettling fluidity. "I should greet my friend," he said, his back to me now. "Proper etiquette matters, even in remote places. Especially in remote places." 17:04. 13 minutes stopped. I followed at a distance, watching as Thomas reached the rear door. He turned the handle without effort despite the emergency locks that should have prevented it from opening while the train was stopped. "Sir, you need to return to your seat," I said, protocol forcing the words out despite their obvious futility. Thomas looked back at me, his neck craning at that wrong angle. "You've been very attentive, conductor. My friend appreciates conscientious observers. They're so rare now." He pushed the door open. The blizzard's full fury rushed in, snow, wind, and bitter cold flooding the rear of the car. Thomas stepped out into the whiteout without hesitation, wearing only his dark coat. I moved to the doorway, gripping the frame to steady myself against the wind. Through the swirling wall of white, I could make out two figures standing beside the tracks. Thomas stood perfectly still despite wind strong enough to stagger a man. Beside him loomed a larger shape, a dark silhouette against the snow. The thing beside Thomas stood at least 8 feet tall. Its proportions were wrong in ways my mind struggled to process. Where shoulders should have been, metal struts extended outward, supporting what looked like sections of train coupling mechanisms. Its torso appeared partially mechanical, with exposed pistons that moved in rhythm with breathing motions. But the most unsettling elements were clearly organic. What might have been human limbs, elongated and joined to mechanical components. Its head rotated toward the train with the precision of a security camera. Where eyes should have been, two brilliant lights glowed with the intensity of locomotive headlamps cutting through the blizzard. The rider. Rule 7 pulsed in my head. The rider can only board stationary trains. 17:06. 14 minutes stopped. The train jerked beneath my feet. A grinding vibration moved through the floor as the engines strained back to life. Engineer Davis had managed to restart our forward movement. I grabbed the door handle and pulled, fighting against the wind to close it. As metal scraped against metal, the locks re-engaging, I caught a final glimpse through the narrowing gap. Thomas raised one hand in a mockery of a friendly wave. The rider turned its glowing gaze toward our departing train, head rotating with that same mechanical precision. The door sealed shut with a pneumatic hiss. I leaned against it, aware of the 7 passengers staring at me from their seats, questions forming on their lips. The train picked up speed, pushing through the blizzard with determined momentum. I checked my watch, 17:07. 1 minute beyond our safety margin, whatever that meant. I moved back up the aisle, avoiding the questions in the passengers' eyes. Outside, the snow continued to fall in sheets, but I could see darker shapes of trees passing now. We were moving again, following the rules, or trying to. When I reached seat 14B, I stopped. Something lay on the cushion, a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before. I picked it up with 2 fingers, as if it might burn me. It was a ticket stub, yellowed with age, for a destination that didn't appear on any current railway map. The date printed across the top read, January 14th, 1952. 71 years ago to the day. I slipped the stub into my pocket beside Louis's rules and continued toward the front of the train, forcing myself to breathe evenly. The radio at my hip remained silent, Channel 7 broadcasting nothing but static. The train eased into Gilham Station at 11:30 at night, 2 minutes ahead of schedule despite the storm delay. I counted the passengers as they disembarked, 11 bodies exiting. The manifest showed 12 boarding in Thompson. I checked the second car again, moving methodically through the rows. Seat 14B remained empty. No luggage in the overhead, no personal items left behind. Just the faint impression in the cushion where Thomas had sat. The station's sodium lights cast yellowish pools across the empty platform. Temperatures had dropped to 35 below, turning exhaled breath into instant frost that crackled when it hit the ground. I locked the train cars according to protocol, noted the time in my log, and headed for the payphone mounted beside the station's east entrance. I fed quarters into the slot and dialed Louie's number from memory. The line connected, rang once, then clicked to voicemail. Not the standard 3 or 4 rings before transfer, just one ring and immediate routing. Either his phone was off or he'd declined the call. Louie always kept his phone on during shifts, company policy and personal habit. I hung up and dialed the Thompson dispatch office. 3 rings, then a click. Thompson dispatch, Hughes speaking. Sandra, it's Richardson. Is Louie there? He was scheduled for the evening run. A pause stretched across the line. David Louie never checked in for his shift. I've been trying to reach him since 1600 hours. The time registered immediately, 4 in the afternoon, exactly when our train had stopped in the blizzard. He mentioned being on the evening Thompson-Gillam. Is someone covering? We pulled Watson off his rest period for the run. Nobody's seen Parker since midday. Sandra's voice remained professionally neutral, but something in her tone suggested concern beneath the railway supervisor facade. You made good time despite the weather report. Storm system moved through faster than predicted. I need to get back to Thompson, I said, my fingers tight around the receiver. What's the earliest return? 6 a.m. passenger service. I can put you on the manifest. Do it. I spent the next 6 hours in the Gillam station's break room, seated beside the radiator with a thermos of black coffee. Sleep wasn't an option. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas's too wide smile and those mechanical pistons moving like lungs in the rider's exposed chest cavity. At 5:45, I boarded the southbound Thompson service and counted the passengers against the manifest. 18 bodies, 18 names, no unexpected faces, no one claiming impossible destinations. The return journey passed without incident, the train rolling through terrain stripped bare by the overnight storm. Sunlight reflected off fresh snow, turning the landscape blindingly white. I performed my duties mechanically, ticket checks, cabin temperature adjustments, weather logging. By noon, the familiar outline of Thompson Yard appeared ahead. I clocked out with minimal paperwork and walked directly to the crew dormitory. Louie's quarters were on the first floor, East Wing, room 115. The door was unlocked when I turned the handle. Inside, nothing seemed immediately disturbed. Louie's flannel shirt hung over the back of his desk chair. A half-empty coffee mug sat beside the sink, a brown ring dried around the inside. Reading glasses lay folded on the nightstand next to yesterday's newspaper open to a half-finished crossword puzzle. What caught my attention were the fragments of paper scattered across the floor beside the bed. I knelt and collected the pieces, some no larger than a fingernail, others the size of playing cards. When I assembled them on the desk surface, they formed Louie's copy of the rules. The page had been deliberately torn, not accidentally damaged. Through the reassembled fragments, I could see that Rule 3 had been circled multiple times in red ink, the pen pressing so hard it had torn through the paper in places. Leave if the train stops more than 15 minutes. I gathered the fragments into my pocket alongside my own intact copy and the yellowed ticket stub from Thomas's seat. The room felt colder than it should have, despite the functioning heater beneath the window. Louie's red-handled flashlight, the one I'd seen him use for night inspections, remained on his bedside table. His insulated boots stood by the door. His wallet lay open on the dresser, displaying his railway ID and what looked like $300 in mixed bills. The door clicked open behind me. I turned to find Sandra Hughes standing in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "Called maintenance when you didn't answer your room phone," she said, glancing around Louie's quarters. "Thought you'd be here." His truck? Still in the employee lot. West side, row 3. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Security did a sweep after I reported him missing for shift. There's footage you should see. Sandra led me to the small security office in the admin building. The day guard vacated his chair when we entered, giving Sandra access to the monitor and playback controls. 1600 hours yesterday, she said, keying the timestamp into the system. North Yard camera 4. The footage showed the employee parking area and the tree line beyond it. Time code in the corner read 1557. 3 minutes later, Louis appeared in frame, walking steadily across the lot toward the trees. He wore only his uniform shirt despite the bitter cold, no coat or gloves visible. His movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, as he reached the edge of the woods. The camera's viewing angle captured his face for just a moment before he entered the tree line. His expression was blank, eyes focused straight ahead. Footage cuts 8 seconds after he enters the trees, Sandra said, her finger hovering over the forward button. True to her word, the video feed stuttered at 16:01 and 14 seconds, then went to static for 22 seconds before resuming. When the picture returned, only empty woods and falling snow remained in frame. Weather interference? I asked. Sandra shook her head. System diagnostic shows no power fluctuation or mechanical failure. Camera just stopped recording. Search team sent 4 men out immediately after the shift no-show. They found no footprints beyond the first 20 yards into the tree line. Fresh snow had covered everything. She clicked off the monitor. Same as with Martinez 6 weeks ago. The pattern crystallized in my mind. 2 experienced railwaymen, both walking into the wilderness without proper gear, both after an encounter with something unexplainable on the northern route, both disappearing without a trace. You had an incident on yesterday's run, Sandra said. It wasn't a question. I placed my copy of the rules and the old ticket stub on the desk between us. Unmanifested passenger. Called himself Thomas. When we stopped in the storm, he exited the train and met something beside the tracks. I paused, then added, Louis called it the rider. Sandra picked up the ticket stub, examining the faded print. January 14th, 1952. She read aloud. Yesterday's date. 71 years apart, I confirmed. She returned the stub to the desk and looked at me directly for the first time since we'd entered the security office. The company has a southern transfer available. Winnipeg to Brandon route. Regular hours, no overnight runs. A way out. A return to normal railway work without the complications of missing colleagues and creatures that stalked stopped trains. Transfer paperwork would be processed by tomorrow, she added. I thought of Greg's abandoned quarters, his report ending mid-sentence. Louis's torn rules scattered across his floor. The methodical way both men had walked into the tree line, as if responding to some unheard call. I'll stay, I said. Sandra nodded once, unsurprised. Your next scheduled run is tomorrow morning, 0600 departure, Thompson to Gillum Day service. She opened a drawer in the security desk and removed a folded weather advisory. The forecast showed another storm system moving toward Thompson. Expected arrival time, 0530 tomorrow morning. Heavy snowfall predicted, she said, sliding the paper across to me. Potential whiteout conditions. I folded the weather report and placed it in my pocket alongside the rule fragments, the ticket stub, and my own copy of the rules. I'd like to see Greg's incident report, I said, the one filed before he disappeared. Sandra didn't hesitate. Supervisor's office, 30 minutes. She left, the door closing with a soft click behind her. On the security monitor, the paused image showed the empty tree line where Louis had disappeared, snow falling endlessly across the vacant path. Sandra's office smelled of instant coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. I sat at a metal folding table she'd cleared for my use, surrounded by personnel files and incident reports dating back 6 months. The wall clock ticked past 2:15 in the afternoon. These are all I could pull without raising flags, she said, placing a final stack beside me. Security access logs get reviewed weekly. I've logged this as routine employee record verification. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a flat, greenish glow across the paperwork. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off snow-covered rails, throwing harsh white light through the blinds in horizontal stripes. "How many?" I asked, already seeing the pattern in the folder tabs. 4 confirmed disappearances in 12 months. 5 if we count Louis now. Sandra leaned against her desk, arms crossed. Official company position is voluntary termination due to isolation stress. I opened the first file, Gregory Martinez. His personnel photo showed a man with steady eyes and a regulation haircut. The final time card entry showed him clocking in at 0500 on December 3rd, but no clock out. The incident report had been filled out in Sandra's handwriting, noting, "Employee failed to report for return journey. Personal effects found in quarters." Attached was Greg's last conductor's log, written in increasingly uneven handwriting. Jan 3, Thompson Gillum. Route departure, 0515. Manifest, 8 passengers boarding. Thompson, weather, clear, 22C. 10:30. Non-manifest passenger claiming Churchill destination seated in car 2. Male, approx. 40s, dark coat. Unusual passenger behavior requiring Rule 5 protocol. Passenger speaks, and the report ended there, mid-sentence. The pen had dragged across the page, leaving a thin line that trailed off the edge. "When did the storm hit on Greg's run?" I asked. Sandra didn't need to check notes. 11:15. Unexpected system moved in from the northwest. Engineer Chen reported whiteout conditions by 11:30. Train stopped for approximately 18 minutes. I reached for the next file. Kenneth Odjig, night freight supervisor. Disappeared October 18th. Final log entry mentioned unauthorized access attempt during unscheduled stop. Weather record showed heavy snow beginning at 21:40 that night. The third file belonged to Martin Welch, engineer. Last seen February 7th. His final report included a maintenance note about unusual sounds on locomotive roof during storm delay. The fourth disappearance was Adam Takahashi, conductor trainee. May 27th. His logbook contained a hastily scribbled note. Passenger in wrong seat. Won't show ticket. I laid the files side by side, arranging them chronologically. All within 24 hours of an unscheduled stop in severe weather. Sandra nodded. All experienced railwaymen. All familiar with northern routes. All gone without taking their wallets, phones, or appropriate outdoor gear. I picked up Greg's unfinished report again, studying the point where his writing deteriorated. The paper showed indentations where he'd pressed too hard with his pen. "There's more," Sandra said, opening her desk drawer. She removed a plain manila folder with no labels. "These aren't disappearances. These are transfer requests." Inside were personnel files for 7 railway employees who'd been moved to southern routes over the past 18 months. Each transfer cited operational restructuring or staffing optimization. But paperclipped to each was a conductor's incident report describing unexplained events on northern runs. One described mechanical sounds mimicking human speech on the radio. Another reported unaccounted passenger movement between cars during blizzard conditions. A third detailed a tall figure standing beside tracks during whiteout, appearing to pace the train. "Budget cuts is the official explanation," Sandra said. "The real reason is these men became unreliable after what they saw, started refusing northern routes." "Unreliable how?" "Calling in sick, demanding partner assignments. One insisted on keeping all doors locked regardless of scheduled stops." She paused. "Management called it stress-induced hallucination, offered transfers instead of termination because these were otherwise solid employees with clean records." I pulled Louis's torn rules from my pocket, spreading the reassembled fragments on the table. "And these?" Sandra's eyes lingered on the paper. "Not company policy, not officially documented anywhere." She touched the edge of the reconstructed page. but every conductor who lasts on northern routes knows them. How long have they existed? First version I saw was in 1996, my second year with Canadian National. She straightened, crossing to the window. My supervisor slipped it to me before my first solo Gillam run. His version had 6 rules, not 8. I noted the implication. The list grew. After incidents, after close calls, after people didn't come back. She adjusted the blinds, blocking the harsh afternoon glare. Railway's been running these northern routes since 1910. That's over 100 years of experiences. You believe them, the rules, the encounters. Sandra turned, her expression carefully neutral. I believe we operate trains through 2,000 kilometers of wilderness where temperatures drop to 40 below, where help is hours away in good conditions, days away in bad. She paused. And I believe there are things in that wilderness that don't appear in company training manuals. I gathered the files, arranging them back into their original stacks. Why keep running the routes if you know the risks? Because people in Gillam, Churchill, and dozen other northern communities depend on these trains, mining operations, medical supplies, food deliveries. She returned to her desk. And because the incidents are rare enough that the company can explain them away. 4 or 5 employees out of hundreds, spread across years. A small calendar on Sandra's desk showed tomorrow's date circled in red. My scheduled departure. Your run leaves at 6 tomorrow morning, she said, following my gaze. Thompson to Gillam Day service. She slid a weather report across the desk. Storm system moving through beginning at 5:30. I studied the forecast. Temperatures dropping to 30 below. Snowfall expected to reach whiteout conditions by mid-morning. Exactly the conditions preceding every disappearance in the files. I meant what I said earlier, Sandra continued. Winnipeg-Brandon transfer is available. Regular hours, no overnight runs. No stops in uninhabited wilderness. The office fell silent except for the wall clock's steady ticking and the distant rumble of a freight engine in the yard. Outside, the afternoon light had begun its early winter fade, shadows lengthening across the snow. Someone has to run these routes, I said finally. Sandra nodded once, unsurprised. Manifest shows 14 passengers tomorrow, mostly mining staff rotation. She hesitated, then added, count them carefully at boarding. I gathered my copy of the rules and stood to leave. When did you first see it? The rider. Her hands went still on her desk. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. February 12th, 1997. Freight run to Gillam. Her voice remained professional, but something in her eyes changed. Storm forced us to stop 20 miles north of Thompson. Through the cab window, I saw it moving between the trees. Our engineer died of a heart attack 6 hours later. She opened her desk drawer and removed a small metal flashlight, the same model Louis had carried. Channel 7 when you need help, she said, handing it to me. Batteries are fresh. I took the flashlight, noting its solid weight. What happens if it boards? Sandra's expression didn't change, but she looked away, focusing on something beyond the office walls. Nobody knows, she said quietly. Nobody's come back to tell us. I left her office as the last gray light faded from the windows. In the hallway, the automated PA system announced the 5 o'clock southbound departure to Winnipeg, right on schedule. Tomorrow morning, I would board the 6 o'clock northbound to Gillam, directly into the path of an approaching blizzard. In my pocket, Louis's torn rule fragments rustled against my intact copy. Rule 7 seemed to pulse against my fingertips. The rider can only board stationary trains.